evening. How's everyone doing tonight? Wonderful. Well, most of you, if not all of you, know me. I'm Chaplain Uwe Stark, the chaplain here of our Chesapeake retirement community. And I welcome you on behalf of our Worship and Spiritual Life Committee and also on behalf of Lifespire, who have made a grant available to have my good friend Rabbi Dr. Panitz here. Now, he informed me earlier today that really some people call him Rabbi, usually in his congregation, and some people call him Doctor. Occasionally some people call him Rabbi Doctor, but he thinks that's a little bit too much of a mouthful. And so you can take your pick to call him Rabbi or Doctor. So Michael Panitz, my good friend Michael Panitz, has earned a PhD in Jewish history from Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City. He is the rabbi of Temple Israel, which is a congregation of about 200 families, and he has been there for 31 years. So obviously people must like him somewhat, just a little bit. Rabbi Panitz is also, besides being a full-time rabbi or minister at Temple Israel, he is also an adjunct professor at Old Dominion University and Virginia Wesleyan University. And he is lecturing on a good number of subjects. Among them are world religions, which is also the focus of our lecture series here. He's married to Sheila for 45 years, and together they have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. We are blessed that he is coming here, so our time frame is roughly, we have this room until midnight, but I figured we don't want to be here this long. So he will lecture for about 45, 50 minutes, maybe up to an hour, and then we have 15 or 20 minutes of conversation. So really, by 8:30 we're probably all done, and he still has to drive all the way back to Norfolk. Now we're so grateful that there was no car trouble this time, and I will have to do the same way. So if it were to break down now, I could help him to come back. But we will have another lecture. Well, we have several other lectures. The next one will be on Islam, and that is not on the 28th of February. So please cross that out, because that was the old schedule before we had to redo everything. Offhand, I do not know when the new one is. I will let you know in advance. March 21st. See if somebody knows what they're doing. So March 21st will be our next lecture. We don't need to announce the other ones, that will be too confusing. But we have 2 more lectures after that, and he will also come back for the Passover Seder meal, which is, Judy, that date we do want? May 1st. So we do nothing in April, but then on May the 1st we will have the Passover Seder celebration, which is limited to 36 people. So that will be about half of the people here. You need to get your name in with Judy. Now officially she only takes names down from middle of March onwards, but I hear that about 6 or 8 people are already on sort of priority list, so get your name in quickly. But now it is just my absolute pleasure to welcome Rabbi Dr. Michael Panitz back.
Thank you, my friend. And may I say, it's a delight to see the residents and friends once again. Most of the people I recognize in the room tonight were here about a month ago or so, when I had the opportunity to speak on more current events. I feel as if, in speaking to you about Judaism, I'm once again pitching a home game. perhaps I'm pitching an away game when I speak to you about Buddhism or Hinduism. I think I'm pitching a home game right now. One generation before the generation of Jesus of Nazareth, there were two leading rabbis in the land of Israel. Oh, please do. I appreciate your help. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
In the back
Yes.
row, can you hear me? Okay. It's rather futile to say, if you don't hear me, raise your hand. If you see my lips moving but don't hear me, raise your hand. So these two rabbis who were considered equally great, the leading rabbis of the generation, their names were Hillel and Shammai. They were both great rabbis, but Hillel was known as having a more winning personality. And the story is told that someone was intrigued by the Jewish religion and was willing to learn about it, but didn't want to spend too much time doing that. So he went to Shammai, who was they were not professional rabbis in those days. They earned their keep honestly, doing different things. Shammai was a carpenter, and he had one of those L's, the perpendicular instruments. So he said to Shammai, "Teach me what I need to know about Judaism while you are standing on one foot." Shammai thought that was a disrespectful condition. How could you teach about Judaism while standing on one foot? He brandished his carpenter's L and said, "Don't waste my time." Undeterred, the fellow goes down the block and finds Hillel, occupied also in some humble profession, and says to him, "Rabbi Hillel, I want you to teach me what I need to know about Judaism while you are standing on one foot." Hillel says, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. The rest is commentary. Now go study." Part of a whole chain of stories about why Hillel was the rabbi that people ultimately listened to. And there are other good ones too in that series, but that's the one I chose for now, because I feel a little bit as if the opportunity is not while standing on one foot, but 45 minutes. Okay, that's about 1 foot plus. I'm 68. I've been teaching Judaism for 3/4 of my years, and I could do it in 45 minutes. I'd rather do it in 45 hours. Okay. I'm going to give you a slightly different approach to each of the religions that we study than you may have had in church or in Sunday school, or even in religious studies departments at college. And the reason is that I'm also a trained historian, and I am always mindful of the fact that religion in general, which talks about our attempt to be in contact with the transcendent, with the infinite, religion is practiced by people, not by angels. And people are rooted in a time and a place. I'll give you just one tiny example of what it means to be rooted in time and place. This morning I was teaching about why is there anti-Semitism in the world? It's a very important topic and urgent to understand it today with such a recrudescence of anti-Semitism. And I mentioned that in the ancient city of Alexandria, people were annoyed with the Jews who were exempt from paying the taxes that underwrote the local pagan cult, because it's idolatry, but were free to give a half shekel to the temple in Jerusalem. 1/2 shekel. So someone said to me, "Is that such a big deal, half a shekel?" I said, "Well, it depends on the time. Today, a half shekel is like, a piece of bubble gum." But I said, raise your hand or chant with me if you know the following chant. Miss Mary Mack Mac, all dressed in black, with silver buttons, right down her back. She asked her mother, for 50 cents to see the elephants jump over the fence. Okay, did you play that when you were a kid, bouncing a ball and going like that? We did in New Jersey, anyway. So some of the students were able to repeat. I say, see, you just told me your cohort. And then I said to everyone else, how much would it cost to get into the circus today? It cost 50 cents when this song was chanted. So someone said, $50. I said, so okay, so half a shekel had at least 100 times the buying power that it has today. So yes, they were annoyed. So notice that people are creatures of history. That's the point of this little story. And we think we know so well what was meant when someone said it 2,000 years ago, but we don't, because those words come to us from today. You've been on Route 64, right?
Yeah.
From being right here, you could not predict what it looks like in Charlottesville or Stanton. You couldn't predict that you'd be in the foothills of the Appalachians from the topography right here. You've probably been on Route 95. You couldn't predict from the stretch in Virginia what it looks like down in Florida or what it looks like up in Maine. So how do we know that if we know words like, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, recited by one of my Jewish homies, by the way, about 2,000 years ago. See, I know what those words mean because I've studied what they meant in the first century. But if you just go to church on a Sunday morning and you hear those words with no context of what those words meant in the first century, are you sure that you understand them? Are you sure you're not just saying, this is what they sound like in the 21st century? You understand the problem? So my account of each religion, and this is a kind of an introduction to the whole series of lectures, since last time was about current events, my introduction will focus on how each of these religions has developed through time. And the last lecture will be devoted to how religions cope with modernity. Because it's been a problem for religions. When someone else is telling you what is true, specifically when your frame of reference is given by secular disciplines, natural science, you have to learn to understand what religion means in a new way. So that's why I'll be emphasizing the historical dimension. And I'm going to begin by asking the question, what in the formative era of the people of Israel, what in their very, very beginning of existence when their nation was born, gave their religion its characteristic emphasis? And I'm going to give you the answer to that, but I ask you to ponder the question for a minute. Religions have characteristic concerns. Right? At the very beginning, Christianity is concerned with the problem of religious hypocrisy. People who talk the talk, but is their heart in it? Maybe they walk the walk, but still is their heart in it? That's a characteristic concern of one religion. What's the characteristic concern of Judaism? Let me give you one little law in the book of Deuteronomy as compared to the most famous law code of its day, the Code of Hammurabi, and maybe you'll be able to get the answer. Code of Hammurabi, law number 16. I doubt that they even teach that in law school. Do we have any attorneys here? Anyone an attorney here? No, I don't think they taught that in law school. Code of Hammurabi, law number 16. Anyone who harbors a fugitive slave shall be put to death. Would you like to live in such a society? Anyone who harbors a fugitive slave. You know, it was only in the 1850s that the Supreme Court of the United States of America said something very harsh about fugitive slaves and how they were nothing more than property. And you could go across state lines to get them back. Well, what does the book of Deuteronomy say about fugitive slaves? Chapter 23, it says, do not take a fugitive slave back to its master. Let the fugitive slave live amongst you in the community of his or her choosing. The only law code in the world at its time that said that. The most famous law code said you can be put to death for not returning a fugitive slave. So now, has that helped you understand what is the problem that gives rise to Judaism? And the answer is found in the core story of the Hebrew Bible, the absolute core story of all, which is the story that leads to Passover. Cecil B. DeMille went to town on it with his 10 Commandments, except that he turned it into a love triangle, as he always did. That's what happens when Hollywood retells the Bible. You get sex and suds and love triangles and spectacles and exploding temples and all sorts of things like that. Right? From slavery to freedom is the main story of the Hebrew Bible. So the Jewish people's consciousness, the consciousness of the tribes of Israel when they first became a nation, was the consciousness of having been enslaved. And we know from Egyptology when this happened. It happened under the 19th dynasty of Egyptian pharaohs. We have archaeological evidence that points right to that. And then having gone free. And the Israelite slaves saw the hand of God in that liberation, in that redemption. The hand of God. And their motivation was to create a society the likes of which the world had never concretized. Namely, a society where all would be equal under the law, under God's law. Revolutionary, radical. Let me go back to the Code of Hammurabi. They thought it was given by a god. Hammurabi, the king, says, I got it from the god Shamash, the god of justice. And the big basalt, stele, in the museum, which has the Code of Hammurabi on it, the original, you see this seated god giving the law to a smaller figure, the king. How could the king be smaller than someone else on a royal stele? Only if that someone else is a god, right? The god is giving the law to the king, the law comes from heaven, and it says, you get as much justice as your social standing dictates. If you're a nobleman, you get this much justice. If you're a freeman, you get this much justice. If you're a slave, way down there. And that's the will of God, the gods, according to the Babylonians. Only in the 5 books of Moses, of course, later on in other children of the 5 books of Moses, like the Gospels. Only in the 5 books of Moses in its day, 3,000 years ago, do you have a statement that Hillel gives. You have to treat your neighbor exactly at the same level as you want him to treat you. You have to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Who thought of such a thing? In whose law code would it say, justice shall you pursue? Say, for us, we think of this as, oh, that's the Old Testament and other things proceed from that base. But how did you build that base? What was the world doing when that base was being built? That was a world where the superpowers were totally built on slavery. Egypt, completely built on slavery. The pharaohs thought nothing of entombing and thereby killing however many slaves when the pharaoh's body was laid to rest in the pyramid. Their lives were expendable, meaningless to them. Only in the Hebrew Bible do you have the notion that every person's life is precious to God. Cain murders Abel, the first murder in the Hebrew Bible. What does God say to Cain? He says, where's Abel, your brother? Cain says, how should I know? Am I my brother's keeper? And that's the question that's been hurled back at God ever since. And what's God's answer to Cain? The blood of your brother is crying out to me from the about that as an image. The blood is screaming to me, saying, murder most foul, to quote Shakespeare. Murder most foul. Now in Hebrew, this is a very interesting point. In Hebrew, the word for blood is a plural noun. So if I want to translate hyperliterally, the Hebrew says, Kol demei achicha tzoakim elai min ha'adama, the voice of the bloods, plural. It's as if every drop. The voice of the bloods of your brother are crying out to me. And the rabbis who wrote the commentary on the Hebrew Bible said, every unborn generation is crying out to God. Because of that murder, we will not be born. Because of that murder, we will not be born. And therefore, the rabbis conclude, Kol hamekayim nefesh achat ki'ilu kiyem olam maleh, which is a beautiful proverb. Whoever saves one life, it's as if you've saved an entire world. Whoever destroys one life, it's as if you've destroyed an entire world. Who thinks of such things? What historical experience leads a group of people to make that formative in their religion? Here's my answer. Having been a have-not, not a have. Having been the 99%, not the 1%. Having been less than nothing. Having been chattel. Having been thought of as nothing more than the tough cells on the soles of the feet of Egypt, or the tough cells on the calloused palms of Egypt, rather than the heart and soul of the country they were living in. That's the experience that leads people to the foot of Mount Sinai. That's the experience that leads people to dare to imagine a religion whose chief concern is justice for all. So that's where Judaism begins. The Jewish religion has a problem, as each religion has a problem. As we'll see in the future, right? The Hindu basic problem is, if you had all the time in the world, which you do, how are you going to get out of the rut of existence? If you want a good introduction to Hinduism without knowing it, watch the movie Groundhog Day. We just finished Groundhog Day. It's an excellent introduction. Whether or not the movie makers knew it, it's an excellent introduction to Groundhog Day. What's the basic problem that Buddhism tries to solve? Why is everybody in pain? What can you do about it? Each religion has a problem that it tries to solve. The problem that Judaism exists in order to solve is, why do people hurt each other so much? And what can we do to ameliorate that? That's the classic problem that Judaism exists to solve. Now, if everyone is under the law, it should go without statement that there's no room for chauvinism. All the anti-Semitic statements about the Jewish people, oh, they think they're better than anybody else, is absolutely refuted by what the Bible actually says. Consider the prophets of Israel. There was never as harsh a critic as these in-house critics. The prophet Amos, chapter 3 of Amos. O Israel, I've known you from among the nations, which means what? Very simply, it means you were the lucky ones to get the 10 Commandments. Maybe one day everybody will have them. In the days of Amos, no one else had them. Maybe one day everyone will be happy. If Amos could come back today and he'd see that billions of people in this world have the 10 Commandments, he'd say, okay, the plan is moving forward. We're not there yet, but it's moving forward. But in chapter 3, verse 2, he says, because I gave you this blueprint for a better society, when you fail, I hold you to account. So the Bible is pretty harsh on us when we don't live up to it. Now, all of this is trying to show you a different lens for looking at the Bible. Many of us are used to looking at the Bible as a finished product. These are the pages, we read them. The first lesson, the word of the Lord, glory be to God, right? The second lesson, hear the word of the Lord, thanks be to God. as if it's all done, right? I want you to think of the Bible not as a product, but as a process. I'll say that again. Don't think of it as a finished product. Think of it as something that's being made. When you read a verse in the Bible, ask yourself, what lived experience leads to this verse being right here? I've already told you that the lived experience of enduring injustice, terrible injustice, leads people to say, as part of the Bible, justice, justice shall you pursue. That makes sense. What lived experience leads Amos to say, ha ha, you fat cows of Bashan? By the way, you know what the fat cows of Bashan means? It means the very rich ladies who have no problem inflicting human misery so that they can increase their luxury. He calls them fat cows of Bashan. That's pretty strong language, isn't it? What kind of lived experience leads the prophet Isaiah to say, I hate your sacrifices? What a thing to say. I mean, think about it. The book of Leviticus, which is the word of God, tells us to make those sacrifices. Why would Isaiah say, I hate your sacrifices? If not, because the people offering them were busy gouging the poor while they got the money to spend on their sacrifices. So think of the Bible as an echo of life in its beauty and its ugliness and its brilliance and its pain, and as a religious meditation on that, and as a mirror held up to us to say, be better, be your best self, bring your best self to God, and bring your best self to each other to make the world that God wants you to make. Let me ask you this question. What lived experience leads the Bible to assert? Okay, don't think of it as a Sunday school product. Think of it as a process. What lived experience leads the Bible to assert that we are all one family? Isn't that the meaning of the story of Adam and Eve? Noah, and, well, the Bible doesn't say Mrs. Noah. The rabbis say it was Naamah, who was the sister of Tubal-Cain. And their children, Shem, Ham, and Yafet, and their wives, common ancestors to all of us according to the Bible. Why is the Bible telling you that we're all one family? I think the answer is clear. Because the bigots, the prejudiced people, the xenophobes, the chauvinists, the racists, are always saying, they're not me. They're probably not even fully human. They're probably Untermenschen. They're not really fully human. The Bible is saying you're wrong. We're all one family. We're all one family. So what lived experience would lead the Bible to say that? My answer is the experience of having to endure bigotry and prejudice and xenophobia, which we had aplenty when we first started off in Egypt. So I'm teaching you a new way to see the Bible. Now, I want you to recognize something else as well. Some people have the misimpression that Judaism starts and ends with the Old Testament. And what have we been doing since then? We've been waiting at the wrong bus stop. If only we'd go across the street and wait at the right bus stop, we'd get on the right bus and find our way to salvation. Well, we Jews see it differently. Otherwise, we wouldn't be Jewish, right? Duh. For Hebrew culture, the Hebrew Bible is the first word, the first essential word. You can never do without it. But it's only the first word in an ongoing series of words that we've been privileged to hear from God. So we call the Hebrew Bible, instead of using the words Old Testament, we use the words written instruction. The Hebrew word for instruction is Torah. By the way, it's sometimes translated as law. The ancient Greek translation of the Bible, the translation of the 70, translates Torah as nomos, a Greek word which means law. which is why in the Gospels, Jesus is quoted as saying, you know this from the law and the prophets. But Jesus didn't say that. He didn't say from the law and the prophets because he didn't speak Greek. He spoke Aramaic and Hebrew. So what he says is, you know this from the Torah and the Navi. And the Torah means the instruction. So we call the Hebrew Bible the written Torah, the written instruction. So if that is written, what is the other part of it? The unwritten, the oral Torah. So there's a vast development of Torah study in Judaism, which is called the oral Torah. Eventually, the various topics and volumes of oral Torah get written down, and the process continues. Today, the largest compendium of the oral Torah is called the Talmud. You may have heard of the word Talmud. It's a 63-volume massive encyclopedia. Some people have read through it many times. It takes a lot of reading to do that. It takes a lot of reading to go through the 63 volumes of the classic standard encyclopedia. So, why is it important to have an oral tradition? It's very clear. Because words, which seem so precise, lose their precision when you move away in space and time and don't have the same default assumptions. I'll give you one classic American example. In American law today, is a misdemeanor as bad as a felony, or is it less bad? Less bad. A misdemeanor is what? Walking on the grass, where it says don't walk on the grass, something like that? Right? A felony is assault and battery, right? Grand larceny, right? So clearly, we don't use the word the same way that the framers of the Constitution used it. Clearly. Because they said you could impeach a president for high crimes and misdemeanors. So that's a word that Americans ought to know, right? We had 3 impeachment attempts in my life, in my adult lifetime. I'm not old enough to know the Andrew Johnson. Although I think some of my college students aren't sure about that. Did I tell you last time what the student said to me about Martin Luther? You're going to love this. I was giving a lecture on the Protestant Reformation, and I'm talking about Martin Luther, and the student in the back row was just like looking at me, and I think maybe I got some spinach in my teeth or something. And finally, I couldn't resist. I said, is something the matter? She said, Dr. Panitz. She called me doctor. Dr. Panitz, you're not even looking at your notes. And I wanted to say, come on, this is standard stuff. This is the Protestant Reformation. We all learn this. I didn't want to say that. That would be insulting to her. So I deflected the compliment. I said, oh, come on, I'm just so old I remember this stuff. So she said, oh, that explains it. So at first I thought that she just suffers from the historical myopia of the youth. But then I thought, no, she's probably confusing Martin Luther with Martin Luther King. I was alive when Dr. King was alive. Maybe that's what she's thinking. Or maybe I'm just being too kind on her. Who knows? Anyway, I couldn't resist. It's a good story. So words change their meanings. If Americans could ratify in their Constitution the word misdemeanor in 1791 and mean something completely different by it nowadays, so much so that the complete difference is in the law codes, the statutes, then how about the words of the Bible, which are much, much older? How do we understand what they mean? And it gets worse, not worse, it gets more complicated. The Bible has a way of telling you laws for a good society by giving you an extreme example and often not the general example. It's like they define. Let me give you an example of this. In Judaism, everyone here over 18, by the way, I'm about to tell you a PG-13. Okay, this is, I cannot teach this in middle school. Now I have their attention. I cannot teach this in middle school. I'd lose the kids for the whole day. Do you know the Anglo-Saxon term, the wifely duty, refers to something in the marriage bed? Everyone's familiar with that? Do you know that in Judaism there is the husbandly duty? In other words, saying, sign me up. The husband has a duty. Why does the husband have a duty? Again, ask yourself what lived experience leads to a given verse being in the Bible. Well, back then, they had polygamy. That meant that a husband could be legally married to more than one woman. He could be legally married to a woman and leave her completely untouched. She wouldn't get a child, which a woman desperately wanted. In most days and ages, and certainly then, that was her status. That was her identity. Give me a child or I will die, Rachel says to Jacob. Remember that? Give me a child or I'm going to die. So in Judaism, it says that a husband, it's perfectly fine if he's only married to one woman, which I think is more than enough. But the Bible says, but if you dare to be married to more than one woman, don't leave anyone a grass widow. So that's an exceptional case. It's not the general case. The rabbis take that, it's in Exodus chapter 21. It's the second paragraph of chapter 21 of Exodus. So the rabbis take that exceptional case and they turn it into a general duty. The husband who's married to one wife still is obligated to help her in ways that husbands are supposed to help wives to conceive and bear a child. Assuming she wants it, of course. Right? So the Bible doesn't give you the general law, it gives you a specific law, and you need interpretation. I'll give you another interpretation problem. The commandment, do no manner of work on the Sabbath day. What does that mean? You know that in the time of Jesus of Nazareth, there was a big debate over that. How about healing the sick? Is that work that you can do on the Sabbath? Some of his interlocutors said no. He said yes. By the way, the rabbis said yes. People don't know this, but Rabbinic Judaism is on the side of Jesus of Nazareth, not of the people who opposed him in his day. Isn't that interesting? So, the Bible needs to be read in a way that helps you to open it up, not shut it down. What do those words mean? What did they mean? What could they mean? When the Bible uses the word man, does it mean person or does it mean male? Depends on the context. Obviously a huge debate if you want to ask questions such as, are women fit to be ordained as clergy? Does being a woman in any way invalidate you, yes or no? Obviously biblical terms about ish, whether it means human, or whether it means adult, or whether it means male, require interpretation. The Bible doesn't interpret itself. No text interprets itself. That's why we have oral Torah, oral instruction. By the way, the same thing is true in secular law. Why does a court have to issue a warrant before the police can wiretap your phone? Anyone know the answer? The answer is the Fourth Amendment. Unreasonable search and seizure. But last time I looked at the Fourth Amendment, it didn't have one word about wiretaps. Why not? It hadn't been invented. It's new technology. So when did the court decide that a wiretap is covered by the Fourth Amendment? 1967, Katz versus United States. You could look it up. Would I tell you that if it weren't true? And it started off as a minority opinion. Justice Brandeis had a dissent in the 1920s, and he was outvoted in the 1920s. But in the 1967 Warren Supreme Court, that dissent became the majority position, and it is to this day. In other words, even in the American secular law, interpretations of old words can and do change. The Fourth Amendment isn't read today the way it was read before 1967. And some people are in jail today because of that. See, it makes a difference. It's true in religious law as well. Now, the core concepts of Judaism continue to inspire Judaism in every age. What are those core concepts? First of all, the idea that there's one God. Judaism is radically different from its whole environment in saying that. No one else said that. Everybody thought that if you see the power of the ocean, and if you see the grandeur of the skies, and if you can feel sometimes the rumbling of the earth and be scared of it, and if you see the glorious greenery of the earth coming back into bloom every spring, that meant that the family of gods was all at work. Zeus, the god of the sky, Poseidon, the god of the sea, Pluto, the god of the underworld, right? Demeter, the goddess of architecture, of agriculture, and so on and so forth. And every people had its own nomenclature for that, but they all had lots of gods. Judaism is the first thought in the world that all of these are the workings of one God. The whole world, the whole educated world, whether they're theist or atheist today, has bought into that. Because we all talk about a universe. Right? A universe, meaning one set of laws, physical laws, will explain it. Gravity is true here, and it's also true north of the Mason-Dixon line. How do you like that? Electromagnetism works here, and it works on Pluto. Right? And so on and so forth. That idea that everything in this world can be understood as one consistent set of outcomes of a creator is the Jewish gift to the world. It's a gift that makes science possible. But Judaism goes beyond that. Judaism says that this one creator cares about us enough to make us filled with conscience and able to grope our way towards doing the right thing. So now I want to say specifically something to people whose native religious mindset is shaped by Christianity. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but for his own reasons, the great Christian teacher, St. Paul, for his own reasons, creates a dichotomy between faith and works. And you'll see it in his epistle to the Galatians especially, and his epistle to the Romans is very mature thinking about it. And there's reasons why Christianity moved in that direction. In Judaism, we focus on how the two of them can be holistic. It's much more like the epistle of James. You know, one without the other is blind, the other one without the one is lame. So how many of you are still driving a motor vehicle? A few? Well, most of you. Okay. Any motor vehicle that you can think of needs at least two things to actually go down the road. It needs a source of power, right? Whether it's an electric motor or internal combustion engine or maybe even steam, who knows, right? There used to be steam engine cars 120 years ago. And it needs something like a power train to get that power from the engine to the axles, right? So you can actually turn the wheels and go down the road. Every car needs that. So I'm using a humble analogy to tell you the source of power is the faith, the power train is the works. You need faith so that you want to move in the right direction. You need the works so that you do move in the right direction. That's Judaism. So I'm taking a minute out of my 45 to explain that, because for my students who are coming from a Christian mindset, this is a different way of thinking, so it'll give you a chance to mull it over a little bit. So those are core concepts of Judaism. One God. God has given us guidance. That guidance is memorialized in the sacred literature of our Torah. Our focus on family and community and nation as building blocks of the human community, all of these thoughts continue to anchor Judaism in modern times. But I'm going to take a couple of minutes near the end and talk to you about the great differences that have arisen in modern times. We'll talk more about it in my last lecture. So, you may know of denominations. You may have heard of Orthodox Judaism, Conservative Judaism, Reform Judaism. We can make too much of it, and it's a little bit like ice cream. You can have chocolate ice cream, vanilla ice cream, strawberry ice cream. You can have it at the restaurant tonight, and they're all delicious. Right? They're all fattening. They're all problematic if you're dealing with diabetes. And yet they have differences of flavor, right? Judaism, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, they're different flavors. But it's the same ice cream. I want you to realize that. What do they differ on? They differ on certain questions about, we are now living in a larger society. We're not living in a ghetto. We're not living in a self-segregated world where we are the only people we know. What kinds of accommodations do we have to make to living in a larger society? And some say as few as possible, and they become Orthodox. Some say, no, much more than that, just don't lose the core of Judaism. Don't lose the ethical monotheism, which is the core of Judaism. They become Reform. And some say, you're partly right, and you're partly right too. And they become the moderates, they become the centrists, which is the denomination I'm from. So we'll talk more about this in the very last time. But I want to finish with one thought. Judaism does not have a mission to convert the world. We don't have a great commission, as you have at the end of the Gospels. We don't have that. We also don't have anything like the idea of jihad, which is to conquer the unbelievers and to force them to submit. We don't have that. We have rather the mandate to live as a tangible concretization of the way God wants people to live. We're supposed to be loving to each other. We're supposed to be respectful to each other. We're supposed to honor our parents tremendously. We're supposed to care for those in need in a self-sacrificing way. All of this is what God wants us to do. People are welcome to see and take whatever lessons they take, and hopefully it'll bring them closer to God as well. So remember that Judaism does not have a missionary sense of it. It doesn't have a mission other than to try to be the best people as we believe God wants us to be. So I'm going to stop here. I thank you, and I'm happy to invite questions and comments. Do you want to moderate the questions?
I'll take a microphone and walk around again as we did last time.
I'll be there.
All right, so we'll get a second microphone, and I will be wandering around like we did last time. But while Tom is getting that, is there any one question that you would pose right now? We'll try it without the microphone for the first question.
I got a question.
Yes.
At what point in history did the Jewish culture believe there is only one God?
I'll repeat the question.
Yes, please.
It might be helpful if I repeat the question.
Yes.
At what point and tell me if I'm not paraphrasing accurately, at what point in the Jewish historical experience did the belief in one God really come to characterize Judaism? Is that fair?
Good.
Okay. I'm going to give you two different terms which are close but not identical. One term is monotheism, the belief that there is only one God. And the other is monolatry, the worship of only one God. Slightly different concepts. And there's a huge scholarly debate over that. I'll tell you where I shake out on this. In the older parts of the Bible, when I say older, I don't mean closer to Genesis. I mean, think of the Bible as like a 7-layer cake, right? The layers that are older than the younger layers. You have sentences such as Psalm number 29. Havu l'Adonai b'nei Elim. Oh, ascribe unto the Lord, O you children of the gods. Ascribe unto the Lord grandeur. Or Exodus 15, the Song of the Sea, one of the oldest parts of the Bible. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Who is like you among the gods, O Lord? To me, that sounds like there are other gods, but they can't hold a candle to our God. There is no God like God I know. right? But maybe they exist, but they're not for me. Okay? Why should I root for the Washington Commanders when I could root for the Chiefs? Or who's winning the Super Bowl this year? I forget. Did they win already?
No.
Hasn't happened yet. But you think they will win. So why should I root for the Commanders if I can root for the Chiefs, right? You get the idea? So that's monolatry. There are other teams in the world, but this is my team. Monotheism is, no, there's no other divinity. If you want to see unambiguous monotheism, look at Isaiah chapter 44, which is the most sharp satire against the worship of idols. The guy takes a log home, and he starts chiseling and sculpting, and half of it he turns into an idol, and he bows down to it. The other half, he toasts, he throws it into the fire. He puts up his legs, he says, I'm warm, and he bakes some bread on it. Did you ever hear of anything so stupid in your life? To bow down to half of this log while the other half makes your tootsies warm. That's Isaiah chapter 44. No question but that is monotheism rather than monolatry. So monotheism is unambiguous by the time the Jewish people are in the Babylonian exile, 2,500 years ago. Were they monotheists 500 years before that? Some of them were, some of them maybe not. But it was really only going to Babylonia that forced them to think about this, and I want to explain why. Remember, the whole world is polytheistic. The whole world is pagan, except for this tiny people, the Jews. That means that the whole world believes that there are lots of gods. So which god do you worship? Well, if you leave your home country, you worship the god of the place you go to. They're the gods who can make a difference. I mean, think about it. If you come here from another country, right? If you were born in Germany and you live in the United States of America, what currency do you use to pay your taxes? US dollars, right? You don't pay the tax to the government in the currency that you were born with. So in the ancient world, you pay your tax to the Almighty in the currency of their country. Which, by the way, is why the Babylonians practiced deportation. They deported all the Judeans to Babylon because in their polytheistic way of thinking about it, that's it for the Judeans. Now they're going to get with us. They're going to worship Marduk the way we do. And that would end their sense that they're going to be disloyal. Only the Jewish people said, if there's one God, doesn't it follow that he's one God everywhere in the universe? Why would it make a difference if you leave Israel and go to Babylon? It's still one God. So that's monotheism for sure. And I would like to think that the trauma of the Babylonian exile is what forced the Jewish people to the logical conclusion of their pre-existing beliefs. So I would say that they were on the direction of monotheism. They had the potential for monotheism going all the way back to Moses. I think Moses is a clear monotheist. But as a people, when did they embrace monotheism? I would say the time of the exile, so 2,500 years ago. That would be my answer. The next rabbi who stands here might give a slightly different one. Second question?
Yeah, let's see if we have a second question, and this time I'll bring the microphone. Raise your hand, please, so I can clearly see you. All right, here we go. And would you also tell your name so that the rabbi knows who asked the question?
We've met before. I'm just wondering.
I'm not sure if everyone else knows your name.
I'm just wondering.
I'm not sure if everyone else knows your name.
What did you say?
Your name.
Alice.
Thank you.
I just wonder why, at the time of the crucifixion, why did the Jews not believe in Jesus?
Well, clearly a few of them did, and most of them didn't.
Didn't.
Right, so the question is, why did most of them not? Okay, so try to go back to that day rather than hundreds of years later. And ask yourself, what did the prior Jewish teaching about the Messiah lead them to expect? And did Jesus fulfill those expectations? Remember, they didn't know how the story would continue. So who was a Messiah in earlier Judaism? Remember, the word Messiah, I mean, it doesn't mean someone with long blonde hair and a stained glass window, who looks a little bit more like Thor than like Jesus, if you ask me. You know those movies, Thor? You know, that's a very handsome blonde-haired guy. Why should Jesus look like that? He wasn't Swedish. So who was a Messiah? Who was an anointed one? I'll give you an example. Who was an anointed one? David. The prophet Samuel anoints David with the olive oil. And what does he charge him to do? Get these Philistines off our backs. And David does. David defeats the Philistines in battle. 2 Samuel. And he liberates the Israelites from Philistine servitude. And they're independent. So who were the Philistines of the first century? The Romans. Did Jesus liberate the Jews from Roman rule? No. So most Jews thought, we would have wished that he were, but he wasn't. Now, the loyal early Christians had a very inventive answer to that. And their answer was the second coming. So a belief in the second coming is the moment when infant Christianity breaks out of the eggshell, that is Judaism, and becomes a different religion. But that's no longer the question of why didn't the Jews accept Jesus, because it's already a different religion. Do you understand what I'm saying? He didn't fulfill the expectations that they had at that day and age for what the Messiah would do. A later day and age developed the idea the Messiah will save you from sin rather than save you from the Romans. And when he comes back, he'll take care of the Romans, or whoever the Romans happen to be. That wasn't in Judaism. Thank you for the question.
All right, who has another question? I'll come up there. Give me a moment. I will not do like in the talk shows. I will not run, you know.
Anybody remember Phil Donahue? We have our own Phil Donahue.
All right, here we go. And state your name also, please.
My name is Roger. You touched briefly on faith and works.
Yes.
Is it a 50-50, a 60-40, or how does that all go together?
Well, one answer is God knows.
Yeah. You know, there's parts of James that say, you know, faith without works is dead. But so, how much works and how much faith do you need?
I'm not really quite sure if quantifying is the right way to answer that. How much of your heart do you need versus your liver? You need them both to be in good order, right? That's the way I want to try to answer it.
Of course, faith is a mustard seed.
But I will say that in Judaism, there are some people whose faith is a lifelong struggle. And I know them, I'm a rabbi to them. And yet they know that that hungry person has to be fed. And so I applaud them for making a difference in the world. And I try to help them as they struggle. I would say, in a way, that's more socially utilitarian than someone who has, you know, I'm washed, I'm fine, and looks past his hungry neighbor all the time. So there's a kind of an inclination to saying, make sure that that hungry person gets fed. Sir.
Right, the next question up here. I'll come to the microphone. All right.
Pastor, you're getting your steps in tonight.
Yes,
It's a
indeed.
good thing.
And say your name also, please.
Lou Smith?
Lou.
Yes, Lou. I think, isn't one answer to that question that if you've got the faith, it's going to be demonstrated by works, and if you don't have the works, you're not really that faithful?
Well, certainly in Judaism, the problem of hypocritical actions is known, but it's not central. Judaism recognizes that people can be hypocrites. They can give the charity just because they want their face in the newspaper. Right? They can give the charity because they want their name on the building. We understand that that exists, but again, remember, what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to accomplish a society where people are just to each other. So that obviously reflects actions more so than another set of basic problems.
It's 8 o'clock. We're having the room until midnight, as I said, but maybe we'll take 3 more questions. So, who is the first of the last 3?
So now we're into the penalty kicks.
All right, back there. All right, here we go. Starting with your name, please.
I'm Gary Davidson, and I guess I'll introduce myself as well as coming from a place called Nebraska, which doesn't mean that I'm more or less religious than anyone else here. However, I was raised, like several of us, I'm sure, in a very religious, strict environment with all kinds of rules, okay, that come from the Bible. If you don't follow these rules, you're going to hell. Now, the Bible, Jesus, etc., generally speaking, only go back 3,000 years. But people have been living on this earth for hundreds of thousands of years. What's happened to them? They didn't follow those exact rules.
So did they go to hell? Okay, so I should tell you that my vision of hell is not what you learned in Nebraska, first of all. And I suspect that it's not yours either these days. But I should also tell you that the very same question was posed by a brilliant man who agrees with you, and his name was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He wrote a novel called Émile, which is mostly about education. But as part of the education, Émile doesn't go to school. He has a wonderful tutor who's a vicar from Savoy, and they're walking in the forest, and the Savoyard vicar tells young Émile, "This is my confession of faith." He says, look at the beauty of this world, and look how intricately well ordered it is. I can't imagine that this arose by chance. There has to be some creative intelligence that's greater than ours that leads to all this. And it has to be a loving intelligence, and so on and so forth. And then Rousseau says, if this God truly is a loving Father, I don't want to create a set of conditions where most of my children are condemned to eternal misery. I want my children mostly to be happy, if not all happy. I don't want to create a set of conditions where, because of my creation, most of them are going to be unhappy. So that's why he said, I don't believe in that traditional hell. You understand the analogy? So I want to tell you that to the question, when did hell freeze over? The answer to that is going to be part of our last lecture, but just to foreshadow a little bit. By the 19th century, both in Christianity and in Judaism, you began to have a bifurcation. And what they believe about hell is a good litmus test of that bifurcation. You know, if it's still something like that burning lake of fire that you remember from John Milton, right? Then it's one side of this great divide. If hell is miserable regret at my lost opportunity to live the life I should have lived, if it's been psychologized, it's another side of the great divide. If hell becomes just, well, if I live like a bug, I don't have an afterlife. I'm just done. Psalm number 49. Okay, their end is like the end of the animals. The unwise, the unspiritual. But so we're all caterpillars, and some of us accomplish becoming butterflies, and some of us don't. So hell is the caterpillar who dies, and that's the end of it. The heaven becomes a beautiful butterfly and flits off. That's also on the other side of the divide. I can't give you one answer that satisfies both any more than I can give you one presidential candidate who satisfies everyone in this country. or even half the people in this country. Sir, you asked a very good question last time, I remember. Thank you for both questions.
All right, so 2 more questions to go. Who's the first of the last 2?
Oh, don't be shy, I don't bite.
Do I see any hands?
I just have one more.
All right.
Sorry.
Alice Boring, 1 more question. Here we go.
Well, I have a cousin, and her husband is a Presbyterian preacher. And Jane is so worried that she won't do enough good works, that her house in heaven won't be as good as maybe the next person. So she wants to do a lot of work so that she'll be sitting on the top of the hill. What do you think?
What do I think?
We'll give that to the rabbi. Okay, I tell you sometimes myself what I think, but let's hear what Rabbi Panitz says.
Do you know the name Sigmund Freud? In 1900, by the way, he was not a friend of religion. And a lot of what he writes just frosts my pumpkin. I'm a Yankee, I talk that way. But sometimes he's on the money. In 1908, he published an essay where he calls religion a neurosis. There is, unfortunately, a neurotic style of religion. I'm anxious. I want to be holier than you because I think that there's some sort of shunt. And if I don't get to the front of the line, Harris Teeter's going to run out of their special before I get it. We're like, there's only 144,000 spots in heaven. And if you get it, maybe I won't. That's not my understanding of religion. If God is infinite, then we shouldn't be small-minded in our approach to God. So that's what I want to say about that. And thank you for the question, Alice.
Let us see if there's a final question. And if not, did we have a final one?
Have you written any books?
All right, the question is, have you written any books? And maybe we add, and if not books, articles.
Well, tell me your name.
Mary?
Mary, thank you for that question. The one book-length book that I wrote was my doctoral dissertation, and it was 403 pages long. And probably a few dozen people in the world have read it. I have, however, written monographs and chapters and so on and so forth. And one of the monographs that I'm rather proud of took a look at 2 music composers, both of whom were born Jewish, who left Judaism and who came back to Judaism as their answer to the Nazis. The first was the classical music composer Arnold Schoenberg, whose music is really strange. And the second one was the great jazz composer Kurt Weill. He wrote the 3-penny opera, and he wrote Mac the Knife. Oh, the shark. It's a great song, right? But don't listen to Bobby Darin. Don't listen to Bobby Darin. Listen to Ella Fitzgerald. That's really a good version. Or listen to Lotte Lenya if you want to hear the original one, right? Anyway, Kurt Weill married Lotte Lenya, who was a lapsed Catholic, and that was it for his Judaism. But when Hitler came to power, he re-embraced his Judaism. So I wrote this, it wasn't about musicology, although I touched upon it. It was really about history. It was about how 2 great creative souls who felt that their Judaism wasn't really very important to them early in life, they came back to it. And I thought that was good. Another piece that I wrote that I'm proud of, and these are monographs, they're not just short articles. The great German Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, B-U-B-E-R, spent a decade plus translating the Bible into German. And it's a fascinating translation. It doesn't sound like Luther's German. It sounds like biblical Hebrew, but it happens to be in German. And it's the first and only German translation that did that. And then, after the Holocaust, he went back and finished the last quarter of the Hebrew Bible that he hadn't done. And so at his author party, a great critic of his, another great scholar, a scholar of Jewish mysticism, whose name was Gershom Scholem, who disliked Buber personally. But they were academic colleagues. They couldn't not invite each other to their parties. So Scholem says to Buber, what's the name of the gift that a guest might give as he's leaving? Gastgift, no. There's a German word for a gift that a guest gives as he's leaving.
Gastgeschenk.
Gastgeschenk,
Yeah.
that's it. So Scholem says to Buber, I understand the idea of giving a Gastgeschenk, and your German language translation of the Bible is your Gastgeschenk to the German-speaking people of the world. But why go back to it after the Shoah when all your readers have been murdered? Very tough question. Tough question, and with a drop of acid in it. So I wrote this monograph answering that question. And my answer is that Buber, first of all, was writing in the hopes that there would be an ecumenical movement. Jews and Christians who jointly cherish and venerate the Bible, German-speaking Jews and Christians who venerate the Bible, who could have a text that would not reflect hidden default assumptions that show up in Luther's Bible all the time, but that would truly be a text that could unite the two. So a large part of why he did it was his ecumenical concern. Another part of why he did it was his concern that we might just blow ourselves up. This is the first decade of the nuclear standoff. And the Bible has wisdom that can keep our species alive. And the last part of his answer is, you must never give up hope on the future. So anyway, I wrote a monograph. It was probably about 60 or 70 pages, and that's the last big piece that I wrote. So if you're interested, I'll be glad to bring this in. And anyone here from the Anglican or Episcopalian tradition? Okay, I wrote a piece that you might find interesting. It's called Judaism in the Queen's English. The founder of my denomination was a man named Solomon Schechter. And he used to speak, he talked funny. And he spoke a beautiful English, but he'd say things like, the Synagogue Universal, Catholic Israel, which is strange terminology. So I cracked the puzzle that people hadn't been able to solve before about where did he get his terminology from? And my answer is he got it from the Anglican denomination. Why? Because he was teaching in Cambridge University in the 1890s, where 98% of the students were Anglicans. How do you explain Judaism to an Anglican student body without using Anglican terminology? So that's Judaism in the Queen's English. I'm proud of that one too. Then I wrote some I'm less so proud of.
Well, let's give a round of applause to Rabbi Panitz.
And thank you, my students. Very much look forward to continuing our conversation.
This concludes our lecture for tonight. It's 8:15. If you want to speak to the rabbi for a few minutes, that would be okay, but don't keep him until midnight.
Turn into a pumpkin, is that what you said? I know, Brian.
Recording.